The night Caleb Mercer rode through that storm to buy a wife, he expected a transaction, land, livestock, a woman to warm his bed and bear his name. What he found instead was a father auctioning daughters like cattle, a beauty queen positioned under lamplight, and a shadow in the corner with dirt under her nails and fire in her eyes. Hannah Whitmore wasn't supposed to be chosen. She'd been trained her entire life to disappear, to serve, to accept scraps. But Caleb Mercer didn't build an empire by following expectations. And Hannah? She was about to discover she'd been underestimated for the last damn time. Welcome to a story about the woman nobody saw coming. If you're watching from anywhere in this world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Hannah's journey travels. Now settle in, hit that like button, and let me tell you about the choice that changed everything. The rain came down like judgment. It hammered the shingled roof of the Whitmore estate, though estate was a generous word for what the place had become. Once, it had been something. Proud columns, painted shutters, fences that stood straight. Now the columns peeled, the shutters hung crooked, and the fences leaned like drunks against each other, held up more by habit than integrity. Inside, Gerald Whitmore paced the parlor with the manic energy of a man whose options had run out 6 months ago. "He's late," Gerald muttered, pulling his watch from his vest for the 5th time in as many minutes. Mercer said sunset. It's past sunset. "It's raining, Father." Lydia's voice carried the practiced patience of someone who'd learned not to irritate a desperate man. She sat near the fire, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a portrait. And in a way, she was. She'd spent 3 hours preparing for this evening. The blue silk dress that matched her eyes, the careful arrangement of blonde curls, the rose water dabbed at her throat and wrists. She looked expensive. That was the point. Rain or not, a man of business keeps his word. Gerald's boots left muddy prints across the worn carpet as he stalked from window to door and back again. "If he doesn't come, we're finished. The bank won't wait past November, and November's breathing down our necks." Hannah Whitmore stood in the doorway between the parlor and the kitchen, neither fully in the room nor fully out of it. It was a position she'd perfected over 22 years, present enough to be useful, invisible enough to be forgotten. She wore brown. She always wore brown. Or gray. Colors that didn't stain, didn't show dirt, didn't draw the eye. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her hands were clean, but the nails were short and functional. She'd spent the afternoon checking the horses, reinforcing the chicken coop against the storm, and making sure the parlor was presentable enough to hide the rot. "Hannah, the tea." Gerald snapped his fingers without looking at her. "Make sure it's hot. And for God's sake, stay in the kitchen when he arrives. Lydia will pour." "Yes, Father." She turned toward the kitchen, familiar disappointment settling in her chest like old furniture. "So Chang there, you stopped noticing the weight." Lydia caught her eye as she passed, and for just a moment, something like pity flickered across her sister's perfect face. Then it was gone, replaced by the bright, expectant smile she'd been rehearsing in the mirror. Hannah understood. Lydia wasn't cruel, just desperate in her own way. Beautiful women had different currencies in this world, and their father had made it clear which daughter was the valuable one. The thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. Then, through the rain's roar, came the sound of hooves. Gerald froze mid-pace. Lydia's hands flew to her hair, her dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Hannah stepped back into the shadows of the kitchen doorway, the teapot warm in her hands. The knock, when it came, was solid, deliberate. The knock of a man used to doors opening. Gerald straightened his vest, composed his face and shed something approximating dignity, and pulled open the door. Caleb Mercer stood on the porch like something carved from the storm itself. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the doorway and hands that had clearly spent more time holding reins than teacups. Water streamed from his hat and coat, pooling at his boots. He was maybe 40, maybe older, the kind of weathered that made age irrelevant. His face was all hard angles and sun-carved lines, a jaw sharp enough to cut, and eyes the color of winter sky, pale, cold, assessing. He didn't smile. "Mr. Whitmore." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders across open range. "Mr. Mercer!" Gerald's enthusiasm was too loud, too bright. Please, come in, come in. Terrible night for riding. I've ridden through worse. Caleb stepped inside, removing his hat. His gaze swept the room in one efficient movement, taking in the faded curtains, the threadbare carpet, the fire that couldn't quite fight off the damp chill. Then his eyes landed on Lydia. She rose, the firelight catching the silk of her dress, her smile warm and welcoming. Mr. Mercer, what an honor. I'm Lydia Whitmore. She extended her hand with practiced grace. Caleb took it briefly, nodded, and released it without comment. Gerald rushed to fill the silence. May I take your coat? Please sit. We have tea and... Hannah! He barked toward the kitchen. The tea, now! Hannah emerged from the shadows, teapot and cups on a tray. She kept her eyes down, movements efficient as she set the service on the table between the worn armchairs. My daughters, Gerald announced, gesture sweeping across them with showman's pride that would have been more convincing if his hands weren't shaking. Lydia, my eldest, and Hannah. Caleb's gaze shifted to Hannah for the first time. She felt it like a physical thing, that cold, measuring stare. She risked a glance up, met those winter eyes for half a second, then looked away, stepping back toward the kitchen. Hannah, stay, Gerald ordered. Mr. Mercer has come a long way. The least we can do is be hospitable. So Hannah stayed, standing near the wall while Lydia poured tea with elegant efficiency, and Gerald launched into the speech he'd clearly been rehearsing. As you know, Mr. Mercer, the Whitmore name was once synonymous with quality and prosperity in this county. My grandfather built this estate from nothing, 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land, timber rights, water access. It was an empire. Was, Caleb repeated, accepting the teacup from Lydia with a nod. Gerald's smile tightened. Yes, well, times change, markets shift. I've had some unfortunate setbacks, but the land is still good. The bones are still here. What's needed is capital, fresh investment, a partnership, if you will. You need money, Caleb said flatly. And I need a wife. Your letter was clear enough about the arrangement. The bluntness made Gerald flinch, but he recovered quickly. I prefer to think of it as a merger of assets. You gain a family connection, social standing, a beautiful and accomplished woman to grace your home. He gestured toward Lydia, who smiled on cue. In return, certain financial considerations would be made, enough to settle my debts and restore the estate to its former glory. And which daughter are you offering? The question hung in the air like a blade. Gerald's laugh was nervous. Well, naturally I thought you'd prefer Lydia. She's been educated in all the domestic arts, needlework, music, household management. She speaks French, maintains an extensive correspondence with the finest families, and I didn't ask for her resume, Caleb interrupted, his eyes still on Gerald. I asked which one you're selling. Lydia's smile faltered. Hannah's hands tightened behind her back. Gerald cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, I understand frontier business is more direct than what we're accustomed to here in Virginia, but I assure you, Virginia's 3 weeks behind me, and I've got a ranch that won't run itself. Caleb set down his teacup, the china clicking against the saucer with finality. I came because your letter said you had land, livestock, and a daughter willing to head west. I need a woman who can work, not one who can play piano. So I'll ask again, which daughter and what's she worth to you? The silence that followed was suffocating. Gerald's face flushed red. Lydia is an exceptional young woman. Any man would be fortunate. Then why hasn't any man married her? Caleb's tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. She's what, 24, 25? Pretty as a picture, educated, well-mannered, but you're selling her to a stranger instead of marrying her local. Why? Hannah watched her father's hands clench into fists, watched Lydia's perfect posture go rigid. The suitors in this area, Gerald said tightly, lack the vision and resources for what this family requires. They lack the debt you're drowning in, Caleb corrected. Word travels, Whitmore. I asked around before I came. You've mortgaged everything that wasn't already mortgaged, including your daughter's futures. The bank owns your land, your livestock, probably the chairs we're sitting in. You've got 60 days before they seize it all. Gerald's face went from red to white. You have no right to... I have every right to know what I'm buying into. Caleb stood, and the room seemed to shrink around him. I'm not a charitable man, Mr. Whitmore. I built my ranch from dirt and sweat and 20 years of breaking my back. I need a partner, not a liability. And I need to know if your daughters understand what frontier life actually means. He turned to Lydia, his gaze direct but not unkind. Can you mend a fence, Miss Whitmore? She blinked, caught off guard. I'm sure I could learn. Can you birth a calf? I've never... Slaughter a chicken? Preserve meat? Treat a horse for colic? Deliver a foal? With each question, Lydia's expression grew more stricken. Mr. Mercer, I was raised to manage a household, to oversee servants. I don't have servants, Caleb said. I have ranch hands, rough men who work sunrise to sunset and expect meals on time and their wages paid fair. I have 3,000 acres of cattle range, 200 head of stock, and a house that needs a woman's hand on everything from ledgers to laundry. It's hard work, Miss Whitmore. Honest work, but hard. Is that something you're prepared for? Lydia's mouth opened, closed. She looked to her father, lost. Hannah watched the moment her sister's dreams shattered and felt that familiar pity rise in her chest again. She can learn, Gerald insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. Lydia is intelligent, adaptable. What about the other one? Every eye in the room turned to Hannah. She felt her heart kick against her ribs, felt the weight of attention like a hand pressed to her chest. Caleb crossed the room toward her, his boots heavy on the worn floorboards. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to make her want to step back, but she held her ground. You've been quiet, he observed. I wasn't asked to speak, Mr. Mercer. Something that might have been approval flickered in those cold eyes. Can you mend a fence? Hannah met his gaze. Yes, sir. Wire or rail? Birth a calf? I've pulled 6, lost one. Slaughter a chicken? I process 20 a week for sale in town. Caleb's expression didn't change, but she felt the shift in his attention, from cursory to genuinely interested. You work the land? What's left of it, yes, sir. We've got 40 acres still under cultivation, vegetables mostly, some hay. I manage the planting, harvest, and preservation. The horses? I handle their care, feed, grooming, basic veterinary needs. The house? I maintain it, repairs, cleaning, cooking, accounts. She paused. What accounts there are left to keep? Gerald made a strangled sound. Hannah, that's enough. No, Caleb said quietly, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. Let her speak. He tilted his head slightly. You do all that yourself? Lydia has other responsibilities, Hannah said carefully, aware of her sister's stricken expression in her peripheral vision. She manages our social calendar, correspondence, maintains our family connections. So you do the work, and she does the pretending. It wasn't a question. Hannah's jaw tightened. My sister has many talents, Mr. Mercer. They're just different from mine. I'm not interested in talents, Caleb said. I'm interested in capability. He glanced back at Gerald. You were going to sell me the pretty one. Lydia is the eldest, Gerald stammered. It's traditional. Tradition doesn't survive Montana winters, Caleb interrupted. He looked back at Hannah. How old are you? 22. Ever been married? No, sir. Courted? Hannah's cheeks warmed, but she kept her voice steady. No, sir, I've been occupied with other matters. She's been occupied keeping this place from falling apart while her father gambled away their future, Caleb said bluntly. He studied her for a long moment. Can you ride? Yes, sir. Shoot? Rifle and pistol. I'm a fair shot. Read and write? Yes, sir. I keep the household ledgers. Caleb turned back to Gerald, whose face had gone through several shades of fury and fear. I'll stay 3 days. I want to see your operation, what's left of it. I want to understand what I'm getting into. His gaze shifted between both daughters, and I want to see which one of them can actually survive what I'm offering. Mr. Mercer, Gerald began, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Lydia is the appropriate choice. I'll make my own choice, Caleb said flatly. That was the arrangement. You provide the options. I decide which one becomes my wife. Unless you've changed your mind about needing my money. The silence was answer enough. Caleb picked up his hat. I'll bed down in your barn tonight. Tomorrow, I'll start making my assessment. He nodded to both daughters. Ladies. Then he walked out into the storm, leaving chaos in his wake. The moment the door closed, Gerald exploded. What the hell was that? He whirled on Hannah, his face purple with rage. I specifically told you to stay in the kitchen. Instead, you... I answered his questions, Hannah said quietly. You told me to stay when he asked me to speak. He was supposed to choose Lydia, Gerald's voice cracked. That was the plan. She's beautiful, she's refined, she's everything a man of means would want in a wife. Maybe that's not what he wants, Hannah said. The slap came so fast she didn't have time to flinch. Her head snapped to the side, cheek burning, ears ringing. She stood very still, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her inner lip. You will not ruin this, Gerald hissed, his hand still raised. Do you understand me? Lydia is the one he's supposed to choose. You are a backup at best, a consolation prize. Your job is to make your sister look good, not to seduce him with farm work and livestock. Father, Lydia said softly, her voice thick. Please. But Gerald wasn't done. He grabbed Hannah's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. For 3 days, you will stay out of sight as much as possible. You will not speak to him unless directly addressed. You will not put yourself forward. You will remember your place. Am I clear? Hannah looked at her father, really looked at him, at the fear and desperation carved into every line of his face, at the man who'd once carried her on his shoulders through these same halls, who'd taught her to read and ride and manage accounts because he'd had no son to teach instead, at the man who'd stopped seeing her as a daughter years ago and started seeing her as unpaid labor and a last resort bargaining chip. Yes, father, she said quietly. You're clear. He released her arm, already turning away. Lydia, tomorrow you'll wear the green dress. We'll have him for breakfast, show him the gardens, what's left of them. Hannah, you'll serve, but you won't sit. Understood? Yes, father. Gerald stormed out, muttering about dignity and appropriate arrangements and ungrateful daughters. Lydia and Hannah stood in the parlor, the fire crackling between them, the rain still hammering the roof. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered finally. I didn't mean for him to... I know. Hannah touched her cheek gingerly, felt the heat of the mark. It's not your fault. Hannah, I don't want to go to Montana. Lydia's voice broke. I don't want to marry a stranger and live on some frontier ranch and slaughter chickens and birth calves. That's not the life I was raised for. I know, Hannah said again, but Father will never forgive me if I refuse. And if Mr. Mercer chooses you... Lydia trailed off, the implications hanging heavy between them. If Caleb chose Hannah, Gerald would blame Lydia for failing to be chosen. If he chose Lydia, she'd be sent west to a life she was utterly unprepared for. And if he chose neither, they'd lose everything in 60 days. There was no winning, not for either of them. Go to bed, Hannah said gently. You need to look your best tomorrow. Lydia nodded, gathering her skirts, her perfect composure cracking at the edges. I wish Mother were here. So do I. After her sister left, Hannah stood alone in the parlor, listening to the storm. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cool glass, and looked out toward the barn. Through the rain, she could just barely see lamplight in the barn windows. Caleb Mercer, bedding down with the horses rather than accepting their hospitality. A man who'd spent 20 years building something from nothing, who spoke of partnership instead of rescue, who looked at a woman and asked what she could do instead of how she looked doing it. A man who'd looked at Hannah, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in her life. Her cheek throbbed, her arm would bruise, and somewhere in her chest, something dangerous was stirring, something that felt like hope, which was the most dangerous thing of all. Because Hannah Whitmore had learned long ago not to hope for anything beyond survival. But Caleb Mercer hadn't asked if she could survive. He'd asked if she could work, build, manage, thrive. He'd asked questions that assumed she had value beyond being ornamental or convenient. And God help her, some foolish part of her wanted to show him just how capable she actually was, even if it meant betraying her sister, even if it meant defying her father. even if it meant risking everything for a man she'd known for less than an hour. The storm raged on, and Hannah stood at the window watching lamplight flicker in the barn and wondered what the next 3 days would bring. The rain had gentled to a steady drizzle by morning, turning the estate grounds into a canvas of mud and mist. Hannah woke before dawn as always, dressed in her work clothes, brown skirt, plain blouse, practical boots, and headed to the barn to check the livestock. She found Caleb Mercer already awake, curry comb in hand, working over his horse with methodical efficiency. He looked up when she entered, nodded once, and returned to his work. Hannah gathered eggs from the chicken coop, fed the remaining pigs, and was checking the horse's water when Caleb spoke. "Your father hit you." It wasn't a question. Hannah's hand stilled on the bucket handle. He was upset. That's not an answer. She turned to face him. His expression was unreadable in the dim barn light, but his eyes were sharp. He was upset, she repeated carefully, about the arrangement not proceeding as he'd planned. "Because I paid attention to the wrong daughter." "Because you paid attention at all, Mr. Mercer. Most men in your position would have taken father's recommendation, signed the papers, and been done with it." Caleb set down the curry comb, crossed his arms. "I'm not most men." "I'm beginning to understand that." Silence settled between them, broken only by horses shifting in their stalls and the soft patter of rain on the roof. "Your father told you to stay out of sight," Caleb said. "Yes, sir." "He told you not to speak to me unless addressed." "Yes, sir." "And here you are doing your morning work like he never said a word." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "The animals need tending regardless of what arrangements are being made in the house, Mr. Mercer. Would you have me let them starve to preserve appearances?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "No, Miss Whitmore, I wouldn't." She nodded, picked up her egg basket. "Breakfast will be ready in an hour. Father expects you at the house." "And you?" "I'll be serving." "But not sitting." "No, sir." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "Seems to me a woman who does all the work ought to get a seat at the table." "Seems to me a lot of things, Mr. Mercer, but what seems and what is are often different matters." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Whitmore." She looked back. "Your father's a fool." Hannah blinked, caught off guard. "Sir?" "A fool," Caleb repeated. "Any man who builds a house on his daughter's labor while pretending she doesn't exist is worse than a fool. He's a coward." Heat rushed to Hannah's face. Not embarrassment, but something fiercer, something that felt dangerously close to validation. "Thank you for your assessment, Mr. Mercer, but he's still my father." "That doesn't make him right." "No," Hannah thought as she walked back through the drizzle toward the house. "It doesn't. But right and wrong didn't change reality." Breakfast was a performance, and Lydia was the star. She wore the green dress that brought out her eyes, her hair arranged in soft curls that caught the morning light. She laughed at Gerald's attempts at wit, asked Caleb thoughtful questions about Montana, and demonstrated the perfect balance of charm and propriety that their mother had drilled into her from childhood. Hannah served silently, refilling coffee, clearing plates, existing at the edges of the conversation. "The ranch," Lydia was saying, leaning forward with practiced interest. "How large did you say it was?" 3,000 acres, Caleb replied. "About 2/3 grazing land, the rest timber and water access." "And the house?" 6 rooms. Solid construction. Nothing fancy, but it keeps out the wind." 6 rooms, Lydia repeated, her smile never faltering, though Hannah saw the disappointment flicker in her eyes. "The Whitmore estate had 14. How cozy." "It's functional," Caleb said. "I built it myself, with help from my foreman and a few of the hands. Took 2 summers." Gerald leaned in, sensing an opportunity. "Lydia has exquisite taste in decoration, Mr. Mercer. Why, she designed the parlor herself, selected the fabrics, arranged the furniture. She has quite an eye for making a house a home." "I'm sure she does," Caleb said neutrally. He glanced at Hannah as she refilled his coffee. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore." "Of course, Mr. Mercer." His eyes lingered on her bruised cheek for a fraction of a second before returning to his plate. After breakfast, Gerald insisted on showing Caleb the grounds. Lydia accompanied them, parasol in hand despite the drizzle, while Hannah retreated to the kitchen to handle the washing up. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when she heard boots on the kitchen floorboards. "Miss Whitmore?" She turned, surprised. Caleb stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. Mercer, did you need something?" "Your father's giving me the tour. We're heading to the South Pasture next." He paused. "I asked if you'd be joining us." Hannah's hand stilled in the water. "What did he say?" "That you had household duties that couldn't wait." Caleb's expression was carefully neutral. "I told him I wanted to see the operation from all angles. That meant talking to the person who actually manages the daily work." "He didn't like that." "No," Caleb agreed. "He didn't." Hannah dried her hands slowly, buying time to think. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate the consideration, but my father has made his wishes clear. Your father wants my money. My money comes with my conditions." Caleb settled his hat on his head. "I'll be at the South Pasture in 10 minutes. If you'd like to explain what I'm looking at, I'd appreciate the expertise." He left before she could respond. Hannah stood in the kitchen, torn between obedience and opportunity, between the role she'd been assigned and the person she'd spent 22 years becoming. The dishes could wait. She grabbed her worn coat and headed for the South Pasture. She found them at the fence line, Gerald gesturing expansively at overgrown fields, Lydia trying to keep her hem out of the mud, and Caleb listening with an expression that gave nothing away. "Once we clear the brush and rotate the grazing properly," Gerald was saying, "this could support 50 head easily, maybe more." "When's the last time you grazed cattle here?" Caleb asked. Gerald's smile tightened. We've had to consolidate operations recently." 3 years, Hannah said, approaching the group. "We sold off the last of the cattle 3 years ago to pay debts. The land's been fallow since." Gerald's face went red. "Hannah, I told you." "You told me Mr. Mercer wanted to see the operation from all angles," she interrupted calmly. "That includes understanding what condition the land is actually in." She turned to Caleb. "This field needs at least 2 seasons of proper management before it'll support significant grazing again. The soil's been depleted, drainage is poor, and you can see the thistle infestation along the northern section." Caleb walked to the fence, studying the field with the practiced eye of someone who knew land. "What would you do with it?" "If it were mine," Hannah joined him at the fence. "First season, I'd plant a nitrogen-fixing cover crop, clover or vetch. Let it grow, then till it under before winter. Second season, I'd do a rotation of hay, cut it twice, sell half for income, and use half to rebuild the soil. Third season, you could start introducing cattle again, but keep the numbers conservative until you see how the land responds." "That's a 3-year plan before any real profit." "Yes, sir, but it's a sustainable 3-year plan. Push the land too hard now, you'll ruin it for a decade." Caleb nodded slowly. "You learned that from your father?" "I learned that from watching my father not do it," Hannah said quietly, "and then trying to fix the damage after." Gerald made a strangled sound, but Caleb held up a hand. "I asked for honesty, Whitmore. Seems I'm getting it." He looked back at Hannah. "What about the northern acreage? Your father says there's timber rights." "There are, but they're restricted. The previous owner sold selective cutting rights to a lumber company 15 years ago. The contract runs another 10 years. We can't harvest for commercial sale during that time." "But we could harvest for personal use?" Caleb asked. "Building materials, fencing, that sort of thing?" "Within reason, yes, sir." They walked the property for 2 hours. Gerald grew increasingly agitated as Hannah methodically outlined every problem, every limitation, every reality her father had been trying to gloss over. Lydia trailed behind, her pretty shoes ruined, her expression miserable. But Caleb kept asking Hannah questions, and Hannah kept answering honestly. By the time they returned to the house, Gerald was barely speaking to his younger daughter, and Lydia looked like she wanted to cry. "I'll take my lunch in the barn," Caleb announced at the porch. "I need to check my horse's shoes. Miss Lydia, thank you for the tour. Miss Hannah, I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time afterward if you can spare it." He walked away before Gerald could protest. Hannah brought a plate of cold chicken and bread to the barn an hour later, found Caleb examining his horse's hooves with professional thoroughness. He straightened when she entered. Thank you. For the food or the honesty? Both. He took the plate, leaned against a stall door. Your father's furious with you. Yes, sir. Your sister barely looked at you during lunch. I noticed. Doesn't bother you? Hannah considered the question carefully. It bothers me that telling the truth costs me their good opinion, but lying to spare their feelings won't help anyone in the long run, least of all them. Caleb bit into the chicken, chewed thoughtfully. You know what I am, Miss Whitmore? A rancher, sir. A businessman, he corrected. A rancher second. I built what I have by understanding value, real value, not the kind that looks good in lamplight. Your father's trying to sell me a fantasy. Pretty dresses, social connections, land that'll magically become profitable if I just throw enough money at it. He's desperate, Hannah said quietly. Desperate men do foolish things. And you're covering for his foolishness while he sells your sister to save his pride. I'm trying to prevent anyone from being hurt worse than necessary. Caleb set down the plate, his pale eyes searching her face. Why aren't you angry? The question caught her off guard. Sir? You do all the work. You keep this place running while your father drinks and gambles and your sister practices piano. He hits you when you make him look bad and ignores you when you make him look good. Why aren't you furious? Hannah looked away, throat tight. What good would anger do, Mr. Mercer? Would it change my father, improve my circumstances, bring back what we've lost? She shook her head. Anger is a luxury I can't afford, so I work instead. Work yourself to death for people who don't appreciate it? Work because the animals need feeding and the fences need mending and somebody has to keep things from falling apart completely. She met his gaze again. I know what you see when you look at this place, Mr. Mercer. Rot and failure and bad decisions. But it's still my home. These are still my people, for better or worse, and I'm not ready to give up on either one yet. Silence stretched between them, broken only by horses shifting in their stalls. Your sister, Caleb said finally. She's a good woman? She is, Hannah said without hesitation. She's kind, loyal, well-meaning. She was raised for a different world than the one we're living in now. Could she learn, if she had to? Hannah thought about Lydia's misery on the property tour, her ruined shoes, her barely concealed horror at the mention of frontier work. I think it would break her, she admitted. Not because she's weak, but because she's been shaped for something else entirely. Asking her to become someone different would be like asking a songbird to become a hawk. She might try, but it would destroy what makes her who she is. Caleb nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. And you? What were you shaped for? Survival, Mr. Mercer. I was shaped for survival. He held her gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of truth too stark for pretty words. 2 more days, he said quietly. Then I'll make my choice. Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. Yes, sir. Go on then. I'm sure your father has another list of duties waiting. She turned to leave, but paused at the barn door. Mr. Mercer? Yes? Whichever one you choose, and I hope you'll be patient with her. This life you're offering, it's not easy for anyone, but it'll be especially hard for whoever comes from this. She gestured back toward the house, toward the decay and desperation and fading glory. I'm not a patient man, Miss Whitmore, but I'm a fair one. That'll have to be enough. Hannah nodded and walked back through the mud toward the house, where her father and sister waited with accusation and hurt in their eyes. 2 more days. 2 more days until Caleb Mercer chose which daughter would be sold, which would be saved, and which would be left behind to watch everything crumble. 2 more days until someone's life changed forever. And God help her, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. The second day dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn morning that promised frost by nightfall. Hannah was in the root cellar before sunrise, taking inventory of their winter stores, or what passed for winter stores. 3 barrels of potatoes, already showing soft spots, 24 jars of preserves, a quarter side of salt pork, enough to get them through December, maybe January if they stretched it. Not enough to survive a full winter. She was marking tallies in her worn ledger when she heard footsteps on the cellar stairs. Miss Whitmore. She looked up to find Caleb ducking through the low doorway, lamplight catching the silver threads in his dark hair. "Mr. Mercer, you're up early?" Rancher's habit. He glanced around the cellar, taking in the sparse shelves with the same assessing gaze he'd used on the fields. "This is everything?" "Everything we have left, yes, sir." Hannah closed the ledger. "We sold most of our stores 3 months ago. Father thought he could replace them after a business venture paid off." "Let me guess. It didn't pay off?" "No, sir." Caleb moved deeper into the cellar, examining the potato barrels. He pulled one out, turned it over in his hands. The soft spots were obvious even in the dim light. "These won't last until Christmas." "I know. I'm planning to process them this week. Potato soup, hash, anything I can preserve or use before they rot completely." "And after that?" Hannah met his gaze steadily. "After that, we'll manage on what the garden produces and what I can buy on credit in town. It won't be comfortable, but we'll survive." "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Every winter for the past 3 years, Mr. Mercer. Each one a little leaner than the last." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, still holding the potato. "Your father know how close you are to real trouble?" "My father knows what he chooses to know. The rest, he's very skilled at ignoring." "And your sister?" "Lydia knows we've economized. She doesn't know we're 1 bad month from starvation." Hannah crossed her arms, suddenly aware of how cold the cellar was. "There's no point worrying her. She can't fix it, and the knowledge would only make her miserable." "But you carry it alone." "Someone has to, Mr. Mercer. Might as well be the one who knows how to ration flour and stretch salt pork." Caleb set the potato back in the barrel with unexpected gentleness. "Come spring, my ranch puts up 6 barrels of potatoes just for seed. We process another 40 for winter stores, smoked, dried, preserved in every way you can imagine. We slaughter 3 hogs, cure the meat, render the fat. We put up enough food to feed 15 people through a Montana winter and still have surplus for lean times." Hannah felt something twist in her chest. "That sounds like a well-run operation, sir." "It's survival, same as what you're doing here, just on a larger scale with better resources." He moved toward the stairs, paused. "Difference is, on my ranch, the person managing the stores would have help, respect, a fair share of what they helped create." He left her standing in the cold cellar, his words hanging in the air like visible breath. Hannah looked down at her ledger, at the careful tallies that represented the difference between survival and disaster, and felt that dangerous hope stir again in her chest. She climbed the stairs back into the morning light, where her father was already calling for breakfast, and Lydia was practicing scales on the old piano, each note slightly out of tune. The day stretched ahead, full of work and watchful silence, and Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that every moment was being weighed and measured against some invisible scale. By mid-morning, Gerald had orchestrated another performance. He'd invited Caleb to observe Lydia's household management skills, which apparently meant watching her arrange flowers in the parlor while discussing the finer points of table settings and proper calling card etiquette. Hannah was mending a torn section of fence near the barn when she heard Caleb's boots in the grass behind her. "You do all your own repairs?" She didn't look up from the wire she was twisting into place. "When something breaks, Mr. Mercer, you can either fix it yourself or pay someone else to do it. We don't have money for the second option. You have good technique, wires tight, spacings even. My grandfather taught me. Said a woman who could mend her own fences would never be dependent on a man's goodwill." She yanked the wire tight, secured it. He was right about that, at least. Caleb leaned against the fence post, watching her work. "Your father know you're out here instead of inside playing hostess?" "My father knows I'm making sure his property doesn't fall apart while he's showing off his daughter's flower arrangements." Hannah moved to the next damaged section. "He'll overlook my absence as long as the work gets done." "And if I told him I'd rather watch you mend fence than watch your sister arrange roses?" Hannah's hands stilled. "Then he'd accuse me of seducing you with manual labor and probably lock me in my room for the remainder of your visit." "He said something similar last night, called you manipulative, said you were trying to undermine your sister's chances." The words landed like stones in still water. Hannah forced herself to keep working, to keep her voice level. "And what did you say?" "I told him that a woman demonstrating actual skills wasn't manipulation, it was honesty, and that if he couldn't tell the difference, that explained a lot about his current circumstances. Despite everything, Hannah felt her lips quirk. I imagine he took that well. About as well as a man can take being called a fool by someone holding his financial future in their hands. Caleb shifted his weight. He threatened to call off the arrangement, said I was insulting his family by showing preference for the wrong daughter. Hannah's chest tightened. And I reminded him that he has 60 days before the bank seizes everything, and I'm the only offer he's got. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, almost casual. I also reminded him that the arrangement was for me to choose, not for him to assign. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Mercer. I'm conducting business, Miss Whitmore. There's a difference. She finished securing the wire, straightened, finally looked at him. This isn't just business for my father. This is survival. His pride, his legacy, his last chance to pretend the Whitmore name still means something in this county. And what about your survival? Caleb asked quietly. What about your pride? Your future? The question hung between them, too big for easy answers. I stopped thinking about my future a long time ago, Hannah said finally. Now I just think about getting through each day without everything collapsing. That's not a life, that's just existing. It's what I have, Mr. Mercer. Caleb held her gaze, those winter sky eyes seeing too much. It doesn't have to be. Before she could respond, Lydia's voice drifted across the yard. Mr. Mercer, Father was hoping you might join us for tea. The spell broke. Caleb straightened, tipped his hat to Hannah. Duty calls. He walked back toward the house, toward Lydia's perfect posture and welcoming smile, toward the performance Gerald had been orchestrating since dawn. Hannah watched him go, then returned to her fence, twisting wire with methodical precision and trying not to think about futures that didn't involve just surviving. Lunch was a tense affair. Gerald dominated the conversation, telling stories of the estate's glory days, exaggerating the prosperity, glossing over the decline, painting a picture of temporary setbacks rather than systematic failure. Lydia smiled and nodded in all the right places, looking lovely in a pale yellow dress that highlighted her delicate features. Hannah served and cleared, invisible as always, except when Caleb's eyes followed her movements with uncomfortable attention. Of course, Gerald was saying, once the estate is properly capitalized again, we'll resume our traditional social calendar. The Whitmore Christmas Ball was once the event of the season. Everyone who was anyone attended. When was the last ball? Caleb asked. Gerald's smile faltered. Well, we've had to postpone in recent years due to 8 years, Hannah said quietly, refilling water glasses. The last ball was 8 years ago, before Mother died. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gerald's face went red. Hannah, that's not... It's a fair question, Father. Mr. Mercer deserves accurate information. What happened to your mother? Caleb asked, his attention shifting fully to Hannah. She set down the water pitcher carefully. Pneumonia. We had a harsh winter, couldn't afford proper heating throughout the house. She got sick in January, was gone by March. Lydia made a small, pained sound. Even Gerald seemed to deflate, the bluster draining out of him. I'm sorry, Caleb said, and he sounded like he meant it. Thank you, sir. Hannah picked up empty plates. She was a good woman. She deserved better than what this place gave her. She retreated to the kitchen before anyone could respond, before the grief that still lived under her ribs could crack through her composure. She was washing dishes when Lydia slipped into the kitchen, closing the door softly behind her. That was cruel, Hannah. Hannah didn't turn around. It was true. Father was trying to make a good impression. You didn't have to... I didn't have to what? Hannah spun around, soapy water dripping from her hands. Tell the truth. Stop pretending everything's fine when it's not. When has lying about our circumstances ever helped us, Lydia? Her sister flinched. You're trying to make me look bad. I'm trying to prevent you from being sold into a life you're not prepared for. Hannah's voice cracked. Do you understand what you'd be walking into if he chooses you? Real frontier life isn't romantic, Lydia. It's brutal work, isolation, danger. It's everything you've been taught to fear and avoid. And you think you'd be better suited for it? Lydia's eyes flashed with rare anger. You think because you can mend a fence and birth a calf that you're somehow more deserving? I think I have a better chance of surviving it, Hannah said quietly. I think you deserve a different kind of life than what Caleb Mercer is offering. And I think Father's so desperate to save his own skin that he doesn't care which one of us suffers, as long as his debts get paid. Lydia's anger crumbled into something more fragile. I don't want to go to Montana, Hannah. I don't want to marry a stranger and leave everything I know behind. But if I don't, if he chooses you instead, Father will never forgive me. He'll blame me for failing, for not being good enough, for not being what a desperate man decided to sell, Hannah interrupted. That's not failure, Lydia. That's just being human instead of merchandise. But where does that leave us? Lydia whispered. If Mr. Mercer doesn't choose either of us, we lose everything. If he chooses me, I lose myself. If he chooses you, she trailed off, the implications clear. If Caleb chose Hannah, Lydia would spend the rest of her life as the beautiful daughter who wasn't good enough, who failed in her one important task, who watched her younger sister succeed where she didn't. I don't know, Hannah admitted. I don't know how any of this ends well. Lydia wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, rebuilt her composure like a wall. Father wants me to walk the gardens with Mr. Mercer this afternoon. Show him the roses. The roses died 2 years ago. I know. Lydia's smile was brittle. But we'll pretend they're just dormant. That's what we do, isn't it? Pretend everything's just temporarily difficult instead of permanently broken? She left before Hannah could respond. Hannah stood in the kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and hard truths and wondered when her family had become so skilled at lying to themselves. The afternoon brought another shift in the weather. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, carrying the smell of snow. Hannah was in the barn, checking that the roof was secure for winter, when Caleb found her again. Your father sent your sister to find me, he said, climbing the ladder to the loft where she was working. But I told her I needed to inspect the outbuildings first. And do you? Hannah drove a nail into a loose board. Need to inspect them? I need to understand what I'm buying into. That includes knowing whether the barn will collapse in the first snowstorm. It won't collapse. I reinforced the main supports last spring. She moved to the next board. But there's rot in the southwest corner that'll need addressing by next year, and the roof needs new shingles on the east side. Caleb examined her work, running his hand over the reinforced beams. You did this yourself. With help from Thomas, our last hired man, before Father had to let him go for lack of wages. How old were you? 20. It was right after Mother died. Father was not managing well. Someone had to keep things functioning. So you became the man of the house. Hannah hammered another nail, harder than necessary. I became whatever was needed, Mr. Mercer. Gender didn't much factor into it. It should have. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. You were grieving too. You deserve time to mourn, to be cared for, not to shoulder everything alone. Deserving and getting are different things. Hannah set down the hammer, wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. Besides, grief is a luxury. Work is a necessity. I chose necessity. That's the second time you've called something a luxury that most people consider a basic human right. Most people haven't lived my life, Mr. Mercer. Caleb climbed higher into the loft, stood near enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cold air. What do you want, Hannah? The use of her first name startled her. She looked at him, found those pale eyes watching her with uncomfortable intensity. What? What do you want? He repeated. Not what your father wants. Not what's practical or necessary or required. If you could have anything, any life, any future, what would you choose? Hannah's throat tightened. That's not a fair question. Why not? Because wanting things you can't have is just another way to make yourself miserable. Answer anyway. She looked away, out through the loft door at the gray sky and dead fields beyond. I'd want land that responds to care instead of dying despite it. I'd want work that builds something instead of just preventing collapse. I'd want... She stopped, the words too dangerous to speak. What? Caleb pressed. What else? I'd want to matter, she whispered. Not because I'm useful or necessary, but because someone actually valued who I am instead of what I can do for them. The silence stretched long enough that she regretted the honesty. She picked up her hammer, ready to retreat into work. Come to Montana with me. Hannah's hand froze. What? Come to Montana. Be my wife. Build something real instead of just preventing collapse. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, if I'm proposing marriage, you can use my given name. Caleb, she corrected, the name strange on her tongue. You came here for a wife, yes, but you came for Lydia. She's the appropriate choice. She's the choice your father wants me to make. She's not the choice I want. You've known me 2 days. I've known enough women in my life to recognize substance when I see it. Caleb moved closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I need a partner, Hannah. Someone who understands work, who knows land, who won't fall apart when things get hard. Someone who can stand beside me and build something that lasts. I'm not... Hannah struggled for words. I'm not what men choose, Caleb. I'm what they settle for when the pretty one isn't available. Then men are fools. His hand came up, calloused fingers gentle as they traced the fading bruise on her cheek. I'm not settling, Hannah. I'm choosing. My father will fight you. Lydia will be devastated. And she swallowed hard. I don't know how to be someone's wife. I only know how to work. Then we'll figure out the rest together. Caleb's thumb brushed her jaw. I'm not asking you to be someone different. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, just somewhere that values it. Hannah closed her eyes, torn between wanting and fearing, between hope and all the ways hope had disappointed her before. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow. Caleb's hand dropped. That's when I'm telling your father my decision. He climbed down from the loft, leaving Hannah standing among the rafters she'd reinforced alone, her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never let herself imagine. That evening, the household ate dinner in brittle silence. Gerald watched Caleb with barely concealed anxiety. Lydia moved food around her plate without eating, and Hannah served and cleared like a ghost, avoiding everyone's eyes. After dinner, she retreated to her room, the small servants' quarters on the 3rd floor that had been hers since childhood. It was sparse and cold, furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk that held everything she owned. She sat on the bed, staring at her calloused hands, and tried to think rationally about Caleb's proposal. Marriage to a stranger. A journey west to unknown territory. Frontier life that would be brutal even if she was prepared for it. Leaving behind her father, her sister, the only home she'd ever known. Leaving behind her father who hid her and used her. Her sister who needed her but resented her. A home that was rotting around them all. Leaving behind the slow suffocation of being necessary but never valued, useful but never seen. She thought about Caleb's hands on his horse, competent and sure. The way he looked at her and asked about her skills instead of her appearance. The ranch he'd built from nothing, the life he was offering, not rescue, but partnership. She thought about potato cellars that stayed full through winter, about work that built something instead of just preventing disaster, about mattering for who she was instead of what she could provide. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Hannah? Lydia's voice, soft and uncertain. Come in. Her sister slipped inside, closing the door carefully. She wore her nightgown and robe, her hair down around her shoulders, and she looked younger than her 25 years. He's going to choose you, Lydia said without preamble. Hannah's stomach clenched. You don't know that. I do. I've seen the way he looks at you, Hannah. The way he asks you questions and actually listens to the answers. The way he... Her voice cracked. The way he sees you. Lydia... I'm not angry, Lydia interrupted. I should be, but I'm not. I'm relieved. She sat on the bed beside Hannah. I don't want to go to Montana. I don't want to marry a man I don't know and live a life I'm not suited for. But I also don't want Father to hate me for being chosen last. Father's hatred isn't worth preserving a life that would destroy you, Hannah said quietly. I know, Lydia twisted her hands in her lap. I've spent my whole life being the beautiful one. The accomplished one, the daughter who would save us through an advantageous marriage. And now a man is actually offering exactly that, and I can't do it. I'm not brave enough, Hannah. I'm not strong like you. You're strong in different ways. Name one. Lydia's laugh was bitter. Name one useful thing I can do that doesn't involve looking pretty or making polite conversation. Hannah thought carefully. You're kind. You treat people with dignity regardless of their station. You remember details about people's lives and ask after their families. You make people feel valued and seen. Those aren't skills, Hannah. Those are just being decent. They're exactly skills. They're the kind that build communities, that make people want to help you, that create loyalty and connection. Hannah took her sister's hand. You think I'm stronger because I can mend a fence, but you build bridges between people. That matters too. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Then why doesn't Father see it? Because Father only values things that make him look successful, and he stopped seeing either of us as people a long time ago. Hannah squeezed her sister's hand. But that's his failure, Lydia, not yours. They sat together in the cold room, two daughters raised in a house that valued them only for what they could provide, trying to figure out how to value themselves instead. If you go, Lydia said finally, what happens to me? You survive, Hannah said firmly. You find someone who values your kindness instead of just your beauty. You build a life that fits who you actually are instead of who Father wants you to be. And Father? Father faces the consequences of his choices. Without me here to fix everything, he'll have to finally reckon with reality. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too. But you're going to say yes, aren't you? When Mr. Mercer, when Caleb, officially asks? Hannah thought about Montana, about partnership instead of servitude, about being chosen instead of settled for. I think I am, she admitted. Is that selfish? It's survival, Lydia echoed Hannah's earlier words, and you've earned the right to choose it. After Lydia left, Hannah lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind pick up outside and the first sounds of sleet against the window. Tomorrow, Caleb would make his choice official. Tomorrow, her life would change irrevocably, one way or another. And Hannah, who'd spent 22 years being overlooked and underestimated, was about to discover what happened when someone finally looked at her and saw not a servant or a second choice, but a partner worth choosing. The sleet turned to snow overnight, and by morning, the world was transformed into something white and new and full of dangerous possibility. Hannah woke to silence, the peculiar quiet that only comes with fresh snow. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers stiff with cold and something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. Today was the third day. Today, Caleb would announce his choice, and everything would change. She made her way downstairs through the sleeping house, each familiar creak of the floorboards a reminder of all the mornings she'd done this, years of rising before anyone else, of starting fires and making coffee, and preparing for a day of work that no one would notice or thank her for. But this morning felt different. This morning, she was walking toward an ending. The kitchen was dark and cold. She built up the fire in the stove, set water to boil, and was measuring coffee when she heard the front door open and close. Heavy footsteps crossed the parlor, heading toward the kitchen. Caleb appeared in the doorway, snow still dusting his shoulders, his face ruddy from the cold. "You're up early," Hannah said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart kicked. Couldn't sleep. He moved to the stove, warming his hands. Spent most of the night thinking. "About your decision?" "About a lot of things." He looked at her, those winter eyes shadowed. "Did you think about what I said yesterday?" Hannah poured coffee into 2 cups, handed him one. "I thought about little else." "And?" She wrapped her hands around her own cup, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "I have questions first." "Fair enough." "Why me?" The words came out quieter than she'd intended. "You could have any number of women, Caleb. Women who are prettier, more refined, better suited to—" "I don't need pretty, Hannah. I need capable." He set down his cup. "I've been married before." The statement landed between them like a stone in still water. Hannah stared at him, processing this new information. "I didn't know." "No reason you would. It was 15 years ago, back when I was still learning the difference between what a man wants and what he actually needs." Caleb's voice went distant. Her name was Margaret. Beautiful woman, educated, everything a young fool thought he needed in a wife. I brought her west thinking love would be enough. What happened? She hated it. Hated the isolation, the work, the dirt and cold and endless labor. Hated me for bringing her to a place that broke her spirit day by day. He rubbed his face, the gesture tired. She lasted 2 years. Then one spring, she took the household money and disappeared on the eastbound stage. Found out later she made it back to Philadelphia, remarried within 6 months to a banker. I signed the divorce papers and never looked back. Hannah absorbed this, understanding clicking into place. So you're not looking for romance? I'm looking for partnership, for someone who understands that frontier life is brutal and beautiful in equal measure, and who won't blame me when it gets hard. He met her eyes. I'm looking for someone who already knows how to survive, who won't fall apart when things go wrong, someone who sees work as building instead of suffering. That's a cold calculation, Caleb. It's an honest one. I tried marrying for passion. It failed. Now I'm older, wiser, and I know what actually matters. He moved closer. But that doesn't mean I'm offering you a cold marriage, Hannah. It means I'm offering you respect, fairness, and the chance to build something real. The rest, affection, companionship, maybe eventually something deeper that can grow if we let it. But it'll grow from shared work and mutual respect, not from pretty promises. Hannah thought about her parents' marriage, built on romance and refinement, how it had crumbled under the weight of reality. Thought about all the fairy tales she'd heard as a girl, about princes and rescue and happily ever after, and how none of them mentioned what came after the story ended. I'm not afraid of hard work, she said slowly, but I'm afraid of being used, of trading one form of servitude for another. Then let me be clear, Caleb's voice was firm. If you come with me, you'll work hard. Harder than you've worked here, probably, but you'll also have authority. You'll manage the household, oversee the domestic operations, handle accounts and planning and decision-making. You'll be a partner, Hannah, not a servant. What you build, you'll own half of. What you earn, you'll have a say in spending. And if I ever raise a hand to you the way your father did, you have my permission to shoot me. Despite the tension, Hannah's lips quirked. That's quite an offer. It's the only one I'm making. He reached out, took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. I can't promise you'll be happy every day. I can't promise it won't be lonely sometimes, or that you won't doubt your choice. But I can promise you'll never wonder if you matter. You will. To the ranch, to me, to the life we'll build together. Hannah looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her own work-roughened fingers. She thought about root cellars that stayed full, about fences that stayed mended, about work that built something lasting instead of just preventing collapse. She thought about being seen, being valued, being chosen. Yes, she whispered. Caleb's fingers tightened on hers. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll come to Montana. Yes, I'll... Her voice caught. Yes to all of it. For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and lighting those pale eyes with something warm. Then we'll need to tell your father. The warmth in Hannah's chest evaporated, replaced by cold dread. He's going to be furious. Let him be furious. He doesn't get a vote. Caleb released her hand, straightened. But we'll do this properly. I'll speak to him after breakfast, make my intentions clear. And Lydia? You should tell her yourself. She deserves to hear it from you, not as an announcement. Hannah nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the confrontation that was coming, to her father's rage and Lydia's complicated relief and the upheaval that would consume the household. Hannah? Caleb's voice pulled her back. Whatever happens today, whatever your father says or does, you're under my protection now. You understand that? She met his eyes, saw the steel beneath the surface, and felt something shift inside her. For 22 years, she'd stood alone against her father's disappointment and demands. But now, for the first time, someone was standing with her. I understand. The morning unfolded with brittle tension. Hannah made breakfast while Caleb waited in the parlor. Gerald came down first, already dressed in his best suit, his expression carrying forced optimism. Lydia followed, pale and quiet, her eyes finding Hannah's across the room, with a question Hannah answered with the smallest nod. Lydia's shoulders sagged with relief and something that might have been grief. They ate in near silence, Gerald making sporadic attempts at conversation that died in the face of everyone else's tension. Finally, Caleb set down his fork and looked directly at Gerald. Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to speak with you privately. Gerald's forced smile brightened. Of course, of course. Ladies, if you'll excuse us. He practically bounded from his chair, leading Caleb toward his study. The moment the door closed, Lydia turned to Hannah. You said yes. I said yes. And you're sure? Truly sure? Hannah thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of invisible labor, the slow suffocation of being necessary but never valued, the bone-deep exhaustion of holding everything together alone. She thought about Caleb's offer of partnership, of mattering, of building something instead of just preventing collapse. I'm sure. Lydia reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Then I'm happy for you, terrified for you, but happy. From the study came the sound of Gerald's voice rising, sharp with anger. Both women flinched. Here it comes, Hannah murmured. The study door flew open, and Gerald stormed out, his face purple with rage. You manipulative little Mr. Whitmore. Caleb's voice cut through the tirade, cold and commanding. He stepped out of the study, placing himself between Gerald and his daughters. I'll ask you to remember yourself. Remember myself? Gerald's voice cracked. You come into my house, accept my hospitality, and then you choose her? He jabbed a finger at Hannah. The servant? The hired hand? When I offered you Lydia, beautiful, educated, accomplished. You offered me merchandise, Caleb interrupted. I chose a partner. She's been working against her own sister this entire time, sabotaging Lydia's chances, making herself indispensable. She's been doing the work you should have been doing while you drank away your inheritance and gambled away your daughter's futures. Caleb's voice was flat, factual. Hannah didn't sabotage anything. She told the truth when everyone else was lying, and I respected her for it. Gerald turned on Hannah, and she saw murder in his eyes. You ungrateful, everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed. You've sacrificed nothing, Hannah said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Mother sacrificed. Lydia and I sacrificed. We gave up everything trying to save something you were determined to destroy. How dare you speak to me? I dare because I'm leaving. Hannah stood, her hands shaking but her voice clear. I'm marrying Mr. Mercer and going to Montana, and you can't stop me. You'll get nothing, Gerald snarled. No dowry, no inheritance, not a penny. I don't want your money, Father. I never did. Hannah felt years of suppressed anger rising in her throat. I wanted you to see me, to value me for something other than my ability to fix your mistakes. But you never did, and you never will, so I'm choosing someone who does. You're choosing to abandon your family in our hour of need. You abandoned us years ago, Lydia said quietly, standing beside her sister. Both women faced their father, united for perhaps the first time in their lives. You abandoned us when you started drinking, when you gambled away our security, when you decided your pride mattered more than our well-being. Hannah's just the first one brave enough to leave. Gerald's face went from purple to white. Lydia saw. She's right, Father. Lydia's voice trembled but held firm. And I hope someday I'm brave enough to follow her example. Caleb stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. Mr. Whitmore, here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Hannah with me when I leave tomorrow. In exchange for her hand, I'll still settle your most pressing debts, the bank mortgage and the immediate creditors. That should buy you 6 months, maybe more if you use the time wisely. 6 months? Gerald's laugh was bitter. That's not enough to It's more than you deserve, and it's the only offer you're getting. Caleb's tone left no room for negotiation. You'll sign the marriage consent, and you'll do it without any more dramatics. Or I walk away right now, and you can explain to the bank in 60 days why they should show you mercy. Your choice. The calculation played out on Gerald's face, pride warring with desperation, rage fighting with the cold reality of his circumstances. Finally, desperation won. It always did. Fine. The word came out like broken glass. Take her. Take the ungrateful, manipulative. He stopped, visibly restraining himself. I'll sign your papers, but don't expect me to celebrate this betrayal. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Father, Hannah said quietly. That's the point. Gerald stormed from the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. The slam of his bedroom door echoed through the house. In the silence that followed, Hannah felt her knees go weak. Lydia caught her arm, steadying her. "Breathe," her sister murmured. "Just breathe." Caleb moved to Hannah's other side, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I don't know." Hannah's voice shook. I've never... "You just told your father the truth, probably for the first time in your life," Caleb said. "That takes courage." "It doesn't feel like courage, it feels like cruelty." "Truth often does," Lydia said softly, "but that doesn't make it wrong." Hannah looked at her sister, seeing the understanding in her eyes. "What will you do after I'm gone?" "Survive," Lydia said, echoing Hannah's earlier words. "Figure out who I am when I'm not just the pretty daughter. Maybe find my own way out eventually." She managed a tremulous smile. "You're showing me it's possible." The three of them stood together in the parlor, Hannah, Lydia, and Caleb, surrounded by the faded remnants of a family that had been breaking for years and had finally, irrevocably, shattered. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and avoidance. Gerald locked himself in his study with a bottle, emerging only to sign the marriage consent with shaking hands and bitter silence. Lydia helped Hannah pack her meager belongings, a few dresses, some books, her mother's locket, the worn ledgers that documented years of careful household management. "Take the quilt," Lydia insisted, pulling the patchwork blanket from Hannah's bed. "Mother made it for you. You'll need it in Montana." Hannah ran her fingers over the familiar squares, each one a memory. "I can't take everything." "You're not taking everything. You're taking what's yours." Lydia folded the quilt carefully, placed it in the trunk. "Take the good things, Hannah. Take the memories that don't hurt. Leave the rest of this rotting place behind." That evening, their last dinner together was a quiet affair. Gerald didn't join them. Caleb, Hannah, and Lydia ate roasted chicken and potatoes in the flickering candlelight, making small talk that skirted around the massive changes looming on the horizon. After dinner, Caleb excused himself to handle final preparations for the journey. Lydia and Hannah sat together in the parlor, the fire crackling between them. "I'll write," Hannah promised, "as often as I can." "Tell me everything," Lydia said, "the good and the bad. I want to know what a life of choosing yourself looks like. It might not be as glamorous as you imagine. It doesn't need to be glamorous. It just needs to be real." Lydia took Hannah's hand. "Promise me something?" "Anything. Promise you won't apologize for taking up space, for wanting things, for being seen." Lydia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You've spent your whole life making yourself small and useful. Be big, Hannah. Be difficult if you need to. Just don't disappear." Hannah pulled her sister into a fierce hug, breathing in the rosewater scent that had always meant safety and home. "I promise." They held each other while the fire burned low and the old house settled around them, two daughters raised in the same cage, each finding her own way toward freedom. That night, Hannah lay awake in her small room one last time. Tomorrow she would marry a man she'd known for 3 days. Tomorrow she would leave the only home she'd ever known for a frontier she could barely imagine. Tomorrow she would step into a future that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought about Caleb's steady hands and honest eyes, about the partnership he offered, built on respect instead of romance, work instead of wishful thinking. It wasn't the fairy tales she'd dreamed of as a girl, but maybe fairy tales were for children who didn't yet understand that real magic looked like seed potatoes in a full root cellar and fences that stayed mended through the winter. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams of snow-covered mountains and endless sky, and a man who'd looked at her calloused hands and seen worth instead of damage. Dawn broke cold and clear. Hannah dressed in her best dress, a simple blue wool that brought out her eyes, and packed the last of her belongings. Her entire life fit into one trunk and a carpet bag. 22 years reduced to what she could carry. Caleb was waiting in the parlor, dressed in a clean shirt and dark coat, his hat in his hands. He looked up when she descended the stairs, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Hannah touched her hair self-consciously. "I look ordinary." "You look like yourself, that's what I meant." The local minister arrived at 8, a practical man who'd known the Whitmore family for years and asked no questions beyond the necessary legal ones. Gerald remained in his study. Lydia stood beside Hannah, her hand in her sister's, tears streaming silently down her face. The ceremony was brief, businesslike. Hannah spoke her vows in a steady voice, watched Caleb slip a simple gold band onto her finger. When the minister pronounced them married, Caleb kissed her forehead, a gesture more promise than passion, and she became Hannah Mercer. No longer Whitmore, no longer daughter of a failing house and disappointing father. Mercer, partner to a man who chose her not despite her capabilities, but because of them. "Ready?" Caleb asked, offering his arm. Hannah looked around the parlor one last time, the faded curtains, the worn furniture, the portrait of her mother watching from the wall. She thought about all the years she'd spent here, working and hoping and making herself small enough to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. "I'm ready." They walked out together into the cold morning. The wagon was loaded, Caleb's horse tied behind. Lydia followed them onto the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. "Write to me," she said again, embracing Hannah fiercely. "Every week," Hannah promised. "Be happy," Lydia whispered. "Be so happy that I can feel it all the way back here." Hannah pulled back, looked at her sister. "Be brave. Find your own way out." "I will. You showed me how." Caleb helped Hannah into the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. He took up the reins, looked at her one more time. "Any regrets?" Hannah glanced back at the house, at the peeling paint and sagging porch, at Lydia watching from the doorway, at the bedroom window where her father's silhouette stood watching but not acknowledging. She thought about root cellars that never stayed full, fences that never stayed mended, work that never built anything but exhaustion. "No regrets," she said firmly. Caleb clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. They rolled down the long drive, past dead gardens and rotting fences, past fields that had given up trying to produce. Hannah didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, on the road stretching west, on the future rolling out before her like a map waiting to be drawn. The first mile passed in silence, then two. By the third, they'd left the Whitmore estate behind, the road narrowing as they entered the forest that bordered the property. "You're quiet," Caleb observed. "I'm thinking." "About?" Hannah considered the question. "About the fact that I just married a man I barely know and agreed to travel 2,000 miles to a place I've never seen. About the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing or who I'm becoming." "Scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But also," she searched for the right word, "alive. For the first time in years, I feel alive." Caleb nodded slowly. "Good. Fear and life tend to go together. It's the numb comfort you have to worry about." They rode on through the winter morning, the snow-covered landscape gradually giving way to new territory. By midday, they stopped at a coaching inn to rest the horses and eat. Hannah sat across from Caleb in the dim tavern, sipping cider and watching this man who was now her husband. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "The real version, not the sales pitch you gave my father." Caleb leaned back, considering. "It's hard work. The land is beautiful but brutal. Long winters, short growing seasons, predators that'll take your livestock if you're not vigilant. The house is solid but basic. 6 rooms, like I said, but they need a woman's touch to become a real home." "And the hands? You said you have ranch hands. 8 full-time men, plus seasonal help during drives and harvest. They're rough but decent. They'll test you at first, see if you're actually capable or just decorative. Once you prove yourself, they'll be loyal." "How do I prove myself?" "By doing the work. By not complaining when it's hard. By treating them fairly and expecting the same in return." He paused. "And by not flinching when things get brutal. Ranching isn't gentle, Hannah. You'll see things that turn your stomach. Animals die. People get hurt. There's blood and shit and suffering mixed in with the beauty. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference." Caleb's eyes were serious. "I meant what I said about partnership, but partnership means honesty, even when the truth is ugly." Hannah thought about birthing calves while their mothers screamed, about slaughtering chickens with her own hands, about the time she'd had to put down a horse with a broken leg because they couldn't afford the veterinarian. "I'm not squeamish, Caleb. I've done ugly work before." "On your father's failing estate. This is different." "How?" "Because what you build will actually last. Because the work will matter. Because—" He stopped. seemed to reconsider his words. Because you'll have help. You won't be doing it alone anymore. The simple statement hit harder than Hannah expected. She looked down at her hands, at the new ring circling her finger, and felt something crack open in her chest. I've been alone a long time, she whispered. I know. Caleb reached across the table, covered her hand with his. But you're not alone anymore. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, then returned to the wagon for the afternoon journey. As the miles accumulated between Hannah and her past, she felt layers of old expectations and limitations falling away like shed skin. She wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore, wasn't the unpaid servant or the second choice or the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace. She was Hannah Mercer, partner to a rancher, heading west to build something real. The sun was setting when Caleb pulled the wagon off the main road toward a small homestead where a lamp glowed in the window. Friend of mine, he explained, owes me a favor. We'll stay here tonight, head out fresh tomorrow. The homesteader, a weathered man named Thomas, welcomed them with quiet efficiency. His wife prepared a simple supper while Thomas and Caleb caught up on news and weather predictions. Hannah helped in the kitchen, falling easily into the familiar rhythm of meal preparation. You're the new bride, Thomas's wife, Martha, observed as they worked. Caleb telegraphed ahead that he'd found himself a wife in Virginia. Yes, ma'am. We were married this morning. Martha studied her with sharp eyes. You know what you're getting into? Montana's not Virginia. It's harder, colder, lonelier than most Eastern women expect. I'm not most Eastern women, Hannah said quietly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Good. Martha's expression softened slightly. You'll need that spine. Frontier life has a way of breaking pretty things. But women with grit? They build empires out here. That night, Hannah lay in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar house next to a man who was her husband, but still a stranger. Caleb had been respectful, even courtly, giving her space to change in privacy, keeping to his side of the bed, offering warmth without demands. But Hannah could feel him there in the darkness, could hear his steady breathing, could sense the solid presence of him just inches away. Caleb, she whispered, I'm awake. Thank you. For what? For choosing me. For seeing me when no one else did. For, her voice caught, for giving me a chance to be something other than invisible. The bed shifted as Caleb turned toward her. She could just make out his profile in the moonlight filtering through the window. Hannah, you were never invisible. You were just surrounded by blind people. His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steady. Sleep now. Tomorrow's a long day, and we've got a lifetime ahead to figure the rest out. Hannah closed her eyes, Caleb's hand still holding hers, and let herself believe for the first time in longer than she could remember that maybe, just maybe, she deserved the future she was heading toward. The journey west took 3 weeks by wagon, then another week by rail once they reached the nearest terminus. Hannah watched the landscape transform through the train window, rolling hills giving way to endless plains, forests thinning to grassland, the sky growing bigger with each passing mile until it dominated everything, vast and overwhelming and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Caleb sat beside her, pointing out landmarks and explaining the geography with the practiced ease of someone who'd made this journey before. Other passengers eyed them with curiosity, the weathered rancher and his quiet new bride, but no one intruded on their space. Hannah spent the hours watching the country unfold and trying not to think too hard about what she'd left behind. She'd written to Lydia from the first stop, a brief letter assuring her sister she was well, and the journey was proceeding smoothly. She didn't mention the nights spent in strange beds with a man she was still learning to know, or the way her stomach twisted with equal parts excitement and terror every time she thought about what lay ahead. They arrived in Helena, Montana on a gray afternoon in late November, the air so cold it burned her lungs. Caleb loaded their trunk and bags into a sturdy wagon that had been waiting at the livery, then helped Hannah onto the seat. 2 hours to the ranch, he said, taking up the reins. Roads are rough, but passable. Hannah pulled her coat tighter and watched Helena disappear behind them as they headed into open country. The land here was different from anything she'd known. Vast rolling hills covered in brown grass, mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth against the sky. The wind cut across the plains with nothing to stop it, carrying the smell of sage and cold earth and something wild she couldn't name. "It's so big," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Too big for you?" "I don't know yet." Hannah watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the wind currents. "It's just different. Virginia feels small by comparison." "Wait until you see the ranch." There was pride in Caleb's voice. 3,000 acres sounds like a lot until you're standing in the middle of it and realize you can ride for an hour and still be on your own land. They traveled through the afternoon, the landscape gradually becoming more familiar to Caleb and more foreign to Hannah. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran year-round, the boundary markers of neighboring ranches. "That's the Morrison place," he said, gesturing toward a distant cluster of buildings. "Good people. Jack Morrison's been ranching here almost as long as I have. His wife Sarah will probably visit once word gets around. I brought home a bride." "What will she expect?" Hannah asked. "Sarah Morrison, I mean. What kind of woman does a rancher's wife need to be out here?" Caleb considered the question. Capable, resilient, willing to work alongside her husband instead of expecting to be kept like a hothouse flower. He glanced at her, but also willing to ask for help when she needs it. Pride's a luxury we can't afford out here. If you're struggling, you speak up. If you need something, you say so. Understood? Understood. The sun was lowering toward the mountains when they crested a rise and Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said simply. Hannah looked where he pointed and saw it. A cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from a chimney, fences stretching out in neat lines across the land. The house was larger than she'd expected, but simpler. A solid 2-story structure built from timber and stone. Barns and outbuildings surrounded it, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing, dark shapes against the brown grass. "The Mercer Ranch," Caleb said, and she heard satisfaction in his voice. "Home." They descended the rise and approached along a well-maintained road. As they drew closer, Hannah could make out more details. The neat construction of the fences, the organized layout of the outbuildings, the way everything spoke of careful planning and consistent maintenance. This was a working ranch, not a showpiece, but it was clearly run by someone who took pride in doing things right. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard, tall, lean, maybe 40 years old, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He raised a hand in greeting, moving toward the wagon with long strides. "Boss," he called, "didn't expect you back for another few days." "Made good time," Caleb replied, setting the brake. "Hannah, this is James Cooper, my foreman. Coop, meet my wife, Mrs. Mercer." Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. He touched his hat brim respectfully. "Ma'am, welcome to the ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." Hannah accepted Caleb's hand as he helped her down from the wagon. "Just Coop, ma'am. Everyone calls me Coop." He was already moving to unload the trunk, his movements efficient. "Boys'll want to meet her, I expect." "Tomorrow's soon enough for introductions." Caleb pulled Hannah's bag from the wagon. "Let them know I want everyone at breakfast. It's 6 o'clock. "Yes, sir." Coop hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder like it weighed nothing. "I'll get this to the house. Mrs. Henley left supplies in the kitchen like you asked. Bread, bacon, some preserved vegetables. Should be enough to get you through a few days." "Mrs. Henley?" Hannah asked as Coop headed toward the house. "Widow from the Morrison place. She comes by once a week to help with heavy cleaning, preserving, that sort of thing. Good woman, practical." Caleb led Hannah toward the front porch. "But the house has been essentially a bachelor's quarters for 15 years. It'll need a woman's touch to become a real home again." He opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The house was cool and dim, but solid. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but well made. A table with 8 chairs, a pair of worn armchairs near the hearth, shelves lined with books and ledgers. Everything was clean but sparse, functional without being comfortable. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb pointed to a doorway. 3 bedrooms upstairs, plus a small study. Root cellars out back, smokehouse beyond that. Well's close to the kitchen door." Hannah walked slowly through the space, taking in the bare walls, the lack of curtains, the way everything was organized for efficiency rather than comfort. It was exactly what he described. 6 rooms that needed to become a home. "It's good," she said finally. "Solid. Just needs softening." "That's what I'm hoping you'll bring." Caleb set her bag down near the stairs. "Why don't you look around while I help Coop stable the horses? Take your time. This is your home now. You should get to know it." After he left, Hannah moved through the house more thoroughly. The kitchen was larger than the one at the Whitmore estate, with a good stove, plenty of workspace, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. The root cellar was well organized, and she noted with satisfaction properly stocked for winter. Barrels of potatoes without soft spots, apples wrapped in paper, preserved vegetables in neat rows, smoked meat hanging from the rafters. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple: bed, dresser, washstand. The largest had clearly been Caleb's, his few possessions organized with military precision. The study held a desk, more ledgers, maps of the property tacked to the walls. This was a working ranch run by a practical man who'd built everything with his own hands and maintained it through sheer will and hard work. There was no waste here, no decoration for decoration's sake. But there was also no warmth, no personality, nothing that spoke of the people who lived here rather than just worked here. Hannah stood in what was now their bedroom and thought about how to make this place feel like home. Not the false gentility of her father's house, with its faded glory and pretentious furniture, but real comfort built on honest living, curtains to soften the stark windows, quilts to add color and warmth, perhaps some of her mother's preserving recipes to add to the shelves. Small touches that would transform these rooms from shelter to home. She was examining the kitchen more closely when Caleb returned, stamping snow from his boots. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think I have work to do," Hannah replied, running her hand over the scrub table. "But good work. Building work, not just maintaining work." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." He moved to the stove, checking the fire. "I'll make us some supper. You must be exhausted." "I can cook." "I know you can, but you've been traveling for 3 weeks and this is your first night here. Let me handle it." He was already pulling out pans, slicing bacon. "Tomorrow you can start organizing however you like. Tonight, just rest." Hannah watched him work, competent and unself-conscious, and felt something settle in her chest. This man who'd chosen her wasn't asking her to immediately prove herself or earn her keep. He was giving her space to breathe, to adjust, to find her footing. They ate simple food at the kitchen table: bacon, bread, coffee. Caleb told her about the ranch's routine, the schedule the hands kept, the work that would be coming in the spring. "Winters are quiet," he explained. "We maintain the stock, fix equipment, plan for next year." It's actually the easiest season, though the cold can be brutal. Spring's when things get intense: calving season, branding, fencing repairs. Summer's the big push: haying, rotating pastures, preparing for fall drives. Fall we sell off what we can, then start preparing for winter again. And my role in all this? You'll manage the household operations, like I said: food preparation and preservation, accounts, supplies, coordinating with Mrs. Henley on the heavy work. During busy seasons, you might help in the fields if we're short-handed. During calving, everyone pitches in, including you, if you're willing. "I'm willing," Hannah said without hesitation. Caleb nodded, satisfied. "The hands eat breakfast and dinner here. You'll be cooking for 9 men, 3 times a day during busy season, twice a day otherwise. It's a lot, but Mrs. Henley can help, and the men know how to fend for themselves at midday." 9 men, including you? 8 hands plus me. He poured more coffee. "They're good men, Hannah. Some of them have been with me since I started this place. But they'll test you, see if you're really capable, or if you'll fall apart the first time things get hard. Don't let them intimidate you." "I spent 22 years being underestimated by men who thought I couldn't do real work," Hannah said. "I know how to prove myself." "I imagine you do." Something like approval flickered in Caleb's eyes. "Just remember what I said about asking for help. Pride's not worth a broken back or a burned-out spirit." After supper, they climbed the stairs together. Caleb showed her where to find extra blankets, how to work the window latches, the quirks of the house she'd need to know. When they reached the bedroom, he paused. "I can sleep in one of the other rooms if you'd prefer. Give you time to adjust." Hannah thought about it, about the propriety she'd been raised with, about taking things slowly, about maintaining some distance until they knew each other better. Then she thought about 3 weeks of sleeping beside this man, about the partnership they'd agreed to, about the fact that half measures had never served her well. "We're married," she said simply, "and I'm tired of sleeping alone." Caleb's expression softened. "All right then." They prepared for bed with the awkward courtesy of near strangers, changing in careful privacy, settling under the quilts with space between them. Hannah lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, the wind outside, Caleb's breathing beside her. "Hannah?" His voice came through the dark. "Yes?" "You did well today. The traveling, meeting Coop, taking in everything new. I know it's overwhelming." "It is," she admitted. "But also, Caleb, I looked in your root cellar. And? And it's properly stocked. The potatoes don't have soft spots. There's enough to last the winter with surplus. The preservation is done right, the storage is organized, everything's—" Her voice caught. "Everything's the way it should be." She felt him shift in the darkness. "That surprises you?" "It relieves me," Hannah whispered. "I've spent so many years trying to make something work that was designed to fail. And here you've built something that actually functions the way it's supposed to. I don't have to fix anything. I just have to help maintain something that's already working." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then his hand found hers under the quilts, warm and steady. "You're not here to fix anything, Hannah. You're here to build with me. There's a difference." Hannah held his hand in the darkness and felt the last of her defenses crack. She'd spent so long being strong alone, being capable without support, surviving without thriving. But here, in this solid house on this working ranch, with this man who'd chosen her for her strength rather than despite it, maybe she could finally do more than just survive. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for building something real instead of something pretty." Caleb's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Mercer. Tomorrow you meet the Hands, and they'll be watching to see what kind of woman their boss brought home." Hannah closed her eyes, Caleb's hand still holding hers, and let herself drift toward sleep in this new place that was somehow already starting to feel like home. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the smell of coffee. Caleb was already up, moving quietly around the bedroom as he dressed. Hannah watched him through half-closed eyes. The efficient way he pulled on his clothes, the unconscious competence of someone who'd been doing this routine for years. "You can sleep longer if you want," he said softly, noticing she was awake. "The Hands won't be here for another hour." "I'll get up." Hannah pushed back the quilts, feeling the cold air hit her skin. "If I'm cooking breakfast for 9 people, I should start now." By the time Caleb came downstairs, Hannah had the stove hot and bacon sizzling. She'd found eggs in the cold storage, flour in the pantry, and was working through biscuits when she heard boots on the porch. The Hands came in together, 8 men in varying stages of weathered, all of them stopping short when they saw Hannah at the stove. "Boys," Caleb said from his seat at the table, "this is my wife, Hannah. Hannah, meet the crew." They introduced themselves one by one. Coop she already knew, then Miguel and his brother Carlos, both in their 30s with sun-dark skin and careful eyes. Thomas, barely 20 and eager. Sam, older and grizzled. Dutch, massive and quiet. William and John, somewhere in their 40s, who'd apparently been with Caleb since the beginning. "Ma'am," they each said, touching hat brims, eyes assessing. Hannah met each gaze steadily. "Breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. Coffee's hot. Help yourselves." They moved carefully, these rough men suddenly conscious of their manners in the presence of a woman. Hannah watched them from the corner of her eye as she worked, noting who poured coffee for the others, who waited his turn, who tracked her movements with curiosity versus who seemed wary of the change she represented. She served breakfast efficiently: bacon, eggs, fresh biscuits, gravy. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who did hard physical labor, but she noticed they were cleaner than her father's hands had been, their clothes mended if worn, their manners rough but present. "Good biscuits, ma'am," Thomas ventured after his third one. "Thank you." Hannah refilled the platter. "I'll need to know everyone's preferences and any dietary restrictions. If someone can't eat something, speak up now rather than waste food later." The men exchanged glances. Sam cleared his throat. "No restrictions, ma'am. We eat what's put in front of us." That's practical, Hannah said. But if someone genuinely dislikes something or has an allergy, I'd rather know. I'm here to feed you properly, not poison you with stubbornness. A ripple of surprised amusement went through the group. William spoke up. Miguel can't handle too much spice. Gives him fits. Miguel shot his fellow hand a glare, but nodded reluctantly. It's true, ma'am. Noted. Hannah filed the information away. Anything else? Dutch don't eat pork, Carlos offered. Religious reasons. Understood. Hannah looked at Dutch directly. I'll make sure there's always an alternative. The big man nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. After breakfast, the men filed out to start their day's work. Caleb lingered, helping Hannah clear the table. You handled that well, he said. They were testing me. Of course they were. And you passed. He stacked plates. By asking about restrictions instead of assuming. By listening instead of dictating. They'll remember that. Good. Hannah scraped plates into the scrap bucket. Because I meant it. I'm here to work with them, not rule over them. Caleb moved closer, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. You're going to do just fine here, Hannah. She turned to face him, saw sincerity in those winter eyes. I hope you're right. I am. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Now I need to get to work. You all right here on your own? I've been on my own most of my life, Caleb. I'll manage. After he left, Hannah stood in the kitchen of her new home and took stock. Dishes to wash, bread to bake for tomorrow, inventory to take so she knew what supplies she'd be working with, the house to explore more thoroughly, to understand its rhythms and requirements. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The morning passed quickly. By noon, Hannah had washed dishes, taken complete inventory of the pantry and cold storage, started 2 loaves of bread, and begun making notes on what supplies would need replenishing. The house was warmer now, the stove keeping the chill at bay, and she moved through the rooms with growing familiarity. She was kneading dough when a knock came at the door. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a woman in her 50s standing on the porch. Sturdy build, kind eyes, practical clothes. Mrs. Mercer? I'm Sarah Morrison from the neighboring ranch. Thought I'd come by and introduce myself. Welcome you proper. Mrs. Morrison, please come in. Hannah stepped aside. I was just making bread. Would you like coffee? I'd love some. Sarah entered, looking around with open curiosity. So, you're the bride Caleb brought back from Virginia. We were all wondering what kind of woman would agree to marry a man she barely knew and come west to this hard country. Hannah poured coffee, studied this woman who would likely become her closest neighbor. What kind did you expect? Honestly? Either some desperate city girl who didn't know what she was getting into, or some prairie rose who'd been out here long enough to be practical. Sarah accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. But you seem like something else entirely. What do I seem like? Someone who knows exactly what she signed up for and chose it anyway. Sarah sipped her coffee. That's rare. Most women who come west are either following a man or running from something. You don't have that look about you. Maybe I'm both, Hannah said quietly, following a man and running from something. As long as you know which direction you're headed, that's what matters. Sarah set down her cup. I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Mercer. This is hard country for women. The work never stops, the isolation can be crushing, and the winters will test you in ways you can't imagine yet. But if you're tough enough and smart enough, you can build something real here. Something that lasts. That's what I'm hoping for. Sarah nodded, seeming satisfied. I live about 2 hours' ride east. My husband Jack runs cattle, like Caleb. We've been out here 20 years. I know what it's like to be new, to be learning, to be trying to figure out how to survive in a place that's nothing like where you came from. So if you need anything, advice, help, just someone to talk to who understands, you come find me. Understood? Hannah felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Sarah, we're neighbors now, and neighbors don't stand on ceremony. She stood, pulling her coat back on. I'll come by next week, bring some preserves, and introduce you properly to the other ranch wives in the area. There's about 6 of us within reasonable riding distance. We look after each other out here. After Sarah left, Hannah returned to her bread with a lighter heart. She wasn't as alone as she'd thought. There were other women here, other wives who'd chosen this hard life and survived it. who'd built something real in this vast country. The afternoon brought more work, bread baked, dinner prepared, the house slowly beginning to feel lived in rather than just occupied. When the hands came in at dusk for supper, they were less wary, more willing to talk. Hannah learned their histories through scattered conversation, where they came from, how long they'd been at the ranch, what drew them to this work. After supper, after the hands had left and the dishes were done, Hannah and Caleb sat in the front room while the fire crackled. He was going over ledgers and she was mending a shirt she'd found that needed repair. "Sarah Morrison came by today," Hannah said. Caleb looked up. "Did she? What did you think?" "I think I like her. She's practical, honest, offered help without making me feel incapable. Sarah's good people. She and Jack have one of the best run operations in the territory." He returned to his ledger. "She'll introduce you to the other wives. They're a tight group. They have to be, spread out like we all are." "How often do you see neighbors? Socially, I mean?" "Once a month, maybe. There's usually a gathering at someone's ranch, potluck dinner, music if anyone's brought an instrument. More often during slow seasons, less during busy ones." He glanced at her. "It's not the social calendar you're used to in Virginia." "The social calendar I knew in Virginia was pretense and desperation wrapped in good manners," Hannah said. "I'll take honest friendship over that any day. Even if it's only once a month? Especially if it's real." She finished the mend, bit off the thread. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Your first wife, Margaret. What made you choose her?" Caleb set down his pen, his expression going distant. "I was young, stupid. I thought I needed someone beautiful and refined to prove I'd made something of myself. Someone who'd look good on my arm and make other men envious." He shook his head. "I was building a ranch, but I was still thinking like a boy trying to impress people who didn't matter. And now? Now I know that what matters is partnership, shared work, mutual respect. Someone who sees building a life as collaboration instead of service." He met her eyes. "I chose you because you understand that, because you've been doing that kind of work your whole life just without anyone appreciating it." Hannah set aside her mending. "I won't pretend I know how to be a wife, Caleb. I know how to work, how to manage, how to survive. But the rest, the partnership part, the building together part, I'm going to have to learn as I go. Then we'll learn together." Caleb stood, offered his hand. "It's late. Let's get some rest." That night, as they settled into bed, Hannah felt the first real stirrings of hope. Not the desperate, fearful hope of her father's house, but something steadier. Something built on work and honesty and the slow accumulation of shared moments. "Caleb," she said into the darkness. "Hmm?" "I'm glad you chose me." His hand found hers under the quilts. "So am I, Hannah. So am I." The first Montana winter tested Hannah in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the cold itself, though the temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the basin overnight and her breath crystallized in the air. It wasn't even the work, which was relentless despite Caleb's assurance that winter was the quiet season. Between cooking for 9 men twice daily, managing supplies, helping Mrs. Henley with preservation and heavy cleaning, and learning the 1,000 small details of running a frontier household, Hannah's days were full from before dawn until well after dark. No, what tested her was the silence. In Virginia, even in her father's failing house, there had been the sounds of a populated place, neighbors passing on the road, church bells on Sunday, the distant rumble of town just close enough to remind you that civilization existed. Here, there was only wind and space and the occasional lowing of cattle. The nearest town was a half-day's ride, the nearest neighbor 2 hours away, and some days the only voices Hannah heard were the ranch hands at meals and Caleb in the evenings. She wrote to Lydia every week as promised, long letters describing the landscape and the work and the strange beauty of this hard country. Lydia's responses came irregularly. The postal service was unreliable at best, but when they arrived, Hannah devoured them, hungry for connection to the world she'd left behind. Her father never wrote. Hannah told herself she didn't care, and mostly that was true. By mid-December, she'd settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, fed the hands, cleaned up, then moved into the day's work, baking, preserving, mending, accounts. Mrs. Henley came twice a week, a sturdy woman of few words who taught Hannah the particular challenges of keeping house in Montana without making her feel incompetent. Back east, you worry about moths and mildew, Mrs. Henley explained one afternoon as they worked on preserving a late batch of apples. Out here, it's mice and cold. Everything needs to be sealed tight, stored proper, or it'll be ruined by spring. I'm learning that, Hannah said, carefully wrapping apples in paper. I found mouse droppings in the flour barrel last week. Get yourself a good Mauser. Cat or terrier, doesn't matter which, long as it's got the instinct. Mrs. Henley worked with efficient precision. Mr. Mercer never bothered. Figured a few mice weren't worth the trouble, but now he's got a wife to think about. Pantry's more important. Hannah smiled at the phrasing. A wife to think about, as if her presence made things matter more. The hands gradually warmed to her as well. Thomas started lingering after meals to help carry water, his young face eager for conversation. Miguel taught her some Spanish phrases useful for kitchen work. Even taciturn Dutch began nodding approval when she remembered to make him chicken instead of pork. But it was Coop who became her unexpected ally. The foreman had a quiet competence that reminded Hannah of her grandfather, someone who understood work and respected those who did it well. He started checking in with her after breakfast, asking if she needed anything from town, whether supplies were holding up, if the hands were treating her right. They're fine, Hannah assured him one morning, rough around the edges, but respectful. They know better than to be otherwise, Coop said. Boss made it clear from the start, you're to be treated like the lady of the house, not a servant to order around. I appreciate that, but I don't need to be treated like a lady. I just need to be treated like a person doing her job. Coop studied her with those sharp eyes. You're different from what I expected, Mrs. Mercer. What did you expect? Honestly? Some fragile Eastern girl who'd last maybe a month before crying to go home? Or some hard-eyed woman looking to climb up by marrying a man with land? He shook his head. But you're neither one. You work like someone who knows what work means, and you don't put on airs. The boys respect that. The boys' respect matters to me, Hannah said quietly. I can't do my job if they're fighting me at every turn. They're not fighting you, ma'am. They're following you. There's a difference. As winter deepened, Hannah found herself seeking Caleb's company in the evenings with increasing eagerness. After supper, they'd settle in the front room, him with his ledgers and plans for spring, her with mending or one of the books from his surprisingly extensive collection. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they worked in comfortable silence, but the companionship was steady and real. One night in late December, as snow fell thick outside the windows, Caleb set down his pen and looked at her. You're quieter than usual. Hannah glanced up from the sock she was darning. Am I? You've been staring at that same hole for 10 minutes. He closed his ledger. What's on your mind? She set down her mending, considered deflecting, then remembered his insistence on honesty. I got a letter from Lydia today. Bad news? Not exactly. She said Father's managed to stretch the money you gave him, but it won't last much longer. The bank's been patient, but their patience is running out. Hannah twisted the sock in her hands. She said he's been talking about selling the property outright, moving to Richmond to live with his brother. That might be the smartest thing he's done in years. I know. But it also means Lydia will be uprooted, taken away from the only home she's known, forced to live on someone else's charity. Better than starving in a rotting house, Caleb pointed out. And your sister's young, capable in her own way. She'll land on her feet. I keep telling myself that. Hannah looked at the fire. But I also keep thinking about how I left her there, how I chose my own future and left her to deal with the consequences. You chose survival, Hannah. That's not selfish, it's necessary. Caleb moved to sit beside her on the settee. And from what you've told me about your sister, she doesn't blame you. She encouraged you to go. She did, but that doesn't stop me from feeling guilty. Guilt's a luxury, Caleb said, echoing her earlier words back to her. You can carry it if you want, but it won't change anything. Your father made his choices. You made yours. Your sister will make hers. That's how life works. Hannah leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. Over the past month, they'd grown more comfortable with casual affection, his hand on her back as he passed, her fingers brushing his as they worked side by side. These quiet moments of closeness that felt natural rather than forced. I miss her, Hannah admitted. I knew I would. but I didn't realize how much until I was actually here. Some days the silence is so complete I can barely stand it. It gets easier, Caleb said quietly. You adjust, and spring brings more activity, neighbors visiting, hands working closer to the house, more life generally. Winter's always the hardest for isolation. Did your first wife struggle with it? The isolation? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Margaret hated it. She'd come from Philadelphia, used to theater and social calls and constant activity. Being alone here with just me and a handful of ranch hands drove her half mad. She used to cry for hours, begging me to take her back east. What did you do? At first I tried to fix it. Brought her fabric for sewing, books to read, promised we'd visit town more often. But nothing helped because the problem wasn't what she had, it was where she was. She wanted a different life, and I couldn't give her that without abandoning everything I'd built. So the marriage failed. The marriage was doomed from the start. I was trying to force someone to be something they weren't, and she was trying to change me into someone I could never be. He tightened his arm around Hannah. That's why I'm grateful you're different. You don't expect this place to be something it's not. You see it clearly and choose to be here anyway. Most days I do, Hannah said honestly. But some days I wonder if I made the right choice, if I traded one form of isolation for another. And on those days I remember what I left behind. The slow suffocation of being useful but never valued. The certainty that nothing I did would ever be enough to fix something that was designed to fail. She looked up at him. At least here, what I build actually lasts. That matters more than I expected it to. Caleb kissed her forehead, a gentle gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. You're doing well here, Hannah. Better than well. The house is warmer, the meals are better. Even the hands are cleaner since you started insisting they wash before coming to table. You're making this place a home, not just a working ranch. Is that what you wanted? A home? It's what I needed, even if I didn't realize it. He pulled back to look at her. I'd gotten used to living instead of actually having a life. Work and sleep and work again, with nothing soft or comfortable to break the monotony. But now there's you, and that changes everything. Hannah felt something crack open in her chest, the same feeling she'd had in the barn loft back in Virginia when he'd first asked her to come with him. The feeling of being seen, being valued, being chosen for who she actually was instead of who someone wanted her to be. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, the admission escaping before she could stop it. Caleb went very still. Then his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. I was hoping you'd get there eventually. I've been halfway there since I watched you mend that fence and tell me the truth about your father's failing land. Only halfway. The other half came slower, but it's here now, solid and real and not going anywhere. He leaned in, pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and certain. I love you, Hannah Mercer. Not because you work hard or manage well or make good biscuits, though all those things are true. I love you because you're honest and brave, and you chose a hard life with clear eyes rather than an easy life built on lies. Hannah kissed him back, pouring into it all the words she didn't have, the gratitude and hope and cautious joy of someone learning to trust that good things could actually last. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Come to bed. It's late, and tomorrow's going to be a long day. That night they made love for the first time, not as strangers fulfilling marital obligations, but as partners who'd chosen each other with intention. And afterward, lying tangled together in the warm darkness, Hannah felt the last of her old life finally fall away. She wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore, wasn't the servant, or the second choice, or the one who stayed invisible to keep the peace. She was Hannah Mercer, rancher's wife, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Winter gave way to early spring with deceptive gentleness. The snow began melting in March, revealing brown grass and mud and the promise of new growth. The cattle grew restless, ready for pasture rotation, and the ranch exploded into activity as calving season began. Hannah had helped birth calves before, but never at this scale. For 3 weeks, the ranch operated on minimal sleep and maximum efficiency. Cows labored in the near pastures, and everyone took shifts checking on them, ready to intervene when complications arose. Hannah worked alongside the hands, pulling calves when mothers struggled, treating infections, bottle feeding the ones whose mothers rejected them. She worked in blood and mud and exhaustion, and when Caleb found her at midnight in the barn trying to save a breech calf, he worked beside her without comment, their hands moving in practiced coordination until the calf was born alive and the mother was stable. "Good work," he said as they cleaned up, both of them spattered with blood and slick with sweat despite the cold. "I've done this before," Hannah reminded him. "Not at midnight in a Montana barn with 6 other crises happening simultaneously. You didn't hesitate, didn't panic, didn't need your hand held. The hands noticed." "They're talking about me. They're impressed by you. There's a difference." Caleb slung an arm around her shoulders as they walked back to the house. "Coop said you've got rancher's instincts. Coming from him, that's high praise." By the time calving season ended, Hannah had proven herself in ways that went beyond cooking and cleaning. She'd worked beside the men as an equal, and they'd accepted her as such. When Thomas got kicked by a nervous heifer and Hannah set his broken fingers with efficient calm, Sam started calling her Doc with genuine respect. When she stayed up 3 nights straight, bottle-feeding orphaned calves while managing regular meals for everyone, Miguel's brother Carlos said she had a back made of iron and a heart bigger than Montana. The praise embarrassed her, but it also filled something in her she hadn't known was empty. Spring brought visitors, too. Sarah Morrison made good on her promise, organizing a gathering at the Mercer Ranch in April. 6 ranch wives arrived with their husbands, bringing food and instruments and children who ran wild through the house while the adults talked and ate and played music late into the evening. Hannah found herself surrounded by women who understood this life. The isolation and exhaustion, yes, but also the satisfaction of building something real, the pride of managing vast households with minimal resources, the fierce love for this hard country that shaped them all. "You'll do fine here," Sarah said as they washed dishes together, while fiddle music drifted from the front room. "You've got the backbone for it, and you don't put on airs. That matters more than you know." "I'm still learning," Hannah admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping up." "That feeling never goes away completely, but you get stronger, and the work gets more familiar, and eventually you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving." Sarah dried a plate, her expression thoughtful. "I came out here 20 years ago, scared and homesick and certain I'd made a terrible mistake. But I learned, I adapted. I became someone I never could have been back east. You're doing the same. Did you ever regret it, choosing this life?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Not the choice itself. Sometimes I regret the cost, the friends I left behind, the family I rarely see, the comforts I gave up. But the life I've built here, the woman I've become, the partnership I have with Jack, those things are worth every sacrifice. I imagine you're finding the same." Hannah thought about Caleb, about the ranch, about the person she was becoming in this vast country. "I am," she said quietly. "More every day." By summer, Hannah had been at the ranch for 8 months, and it felt like a lifetime. The house bore her mark now, curtains in the windows, her mother's quilt on the bed, herbs drying from the kitchen rafters, a small garden plot behind the house producing vegetables that supplemented their stores. The root cellar was organized according to her system, the pantry stocked according to her planning, the household running with the efficiency she'd honed over years of managing her father's failing estate. But here, her work built something instead of just preventing collapse. Here, her efforts were noticed and appreciated. Here, she mattered. In June, a letter arrived that changed everything. Hannah was in the garden when Caleb rode up from town, dismounting quickly and crossing the yard with unusual urgency. "Letter from Virginia," he said, handing her the envelope. Hannah recognized Lydia's handwriting immediately, but the paper was fine and the seal was unfamiliar. She opened it carefully, read the first few lines, then had to sit down on the garden bench. "What is it?" Caleb asked, concern sharpening his voice. "Father's dead," Hannah whispered. "Last month. Heart attack, apparently. Quick and relatively painless." Caleb sat beside her, his hand finding hers. "I'm sorry." Hannah stared at the letter, trying to feel something beyond numb surprise. "Lydia says he'd just finalized the sale of the estate. Managed to get enough to settle all the debts with a small amount left over. He gave it to her, told her to use it to build a better life than he could provide. Her voice caught. She says in the end, he did the right thing. For the first time in years, he actually thought about someone other than himself. People sometimes find clarity when they're facing the end. Maybe, Hannah read further. She's going to Richmond to live with our uncle temporarily, but she's already received 3 marriage proposals. Apparently a beautiful woman with a modest dowry and good connections is valuable, even if she can't slaughter chickens. Despite everything, Hannah smiled. She sounds relieved. Says she's not ready to marry yet, but it's good to know she has options, that she won't be dependent on anyone's charity. So she'll be all right. I think she will. Hannah folded the letter carefully. She says she's proud of me, that I showed her it was possible to choose a different life, and now she's doing the same in her own way. You did show her that, Caleb said quietly. You showed everyone. You chose yourself when no one else would have blamed you for settling. That takes courage. Hannah leaned against him, felt his arm come around her. I should feel sadder about Father. He was difficult and selfish, and he failed us in most of the ways that mattered. But he was still my father. You can grieve him and still acknowledge his failures. One doesn't cancel out the other. I think mostly I grieve for what he could have been. The man he was before pride and desperation consumed him. The father who taught me to read and manage accounts because he saw value in educating his daughters, even if he later forgot that value existed. They sat together in the garden while bees hummed in the herbs and the afternoon sun warmed their shoulders. Hannah thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, overlooked, undervalued, slowly suffocating in a house that was rotting around her. That girl would barely recognize the woman she'd become. I need to write back to Lydia, Hannah said finally. Tell her I'm well, that I'm happy, that she should visit when she's ready. She'd be welcome here, Caleb agreed. Anytime. That evening, Hannah wrote a long letter to her sister describing the ranch and the work and the woman she was becoming. She told Lydia about the garden and the cattle and the vast sky that made her feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. She told her about Caleb's steady partnership and the respect she'd earned from rough men who valued capability over appearance. She told her about the life she was building in this hard country, brick by brick and choice by choice. And she told her sister the truth she'd finally come to understand. She hadn't been chosen because she was worth more than Lydia. She'd been chosen because she was right for this specific life, just as Lydia would find someone who was right for hers. Value wasn't universal or comparative. It was contextual, personal, and as varied as the people who sought to understand it. Summer passed in a blur of work and growth. The cattle thrived, the garden produced abundantly, and Hannah's competence expanded to match the demands placed on her. She learned to treat sick animals, to read weather patterns, to judge the quality of hay and the readiness of vegetables. She learned which hands needed gentle encouragement and which needed direct orders. She learned to navigate the politics of neighboring ranches and the economics of frontier commerce. But more than skills, she learned her own worth. Not the worth assigned to her by others, but the intrinsic value of being herself fully and without apology. She learned to take up space, to voice opinions, to make decisions without automatically deferring to someone else's judgment. And Caleb, true to his word, treated her as a partner in all things. They made decisions together about stock purchases, about hiring additional hands for the fall drive, about improvements to the house and barn. He sought her counsel and respected her judgment, and when they disagreed, they worked through it with honest discussion rather than him simply overruling her. You've changed, Coop observed one afternoon as Hannah worked alongside him to repair a section of fence. From when you first arrived, I mean. How so? You're steadier, more certain. When you first got here, you worked like someone trying to prove something. Now you work like someone who knows her value and doesn't need permission to claim it. Hannah straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. I suppose that's true. I spent so long being told I was second best. It took a while to believe that maybe I wasn't. You were never second best, ma'am. You were just in the wrong place, being measured by the wrong standards. Coop secured the wire with practiced efficiency. Out here, what matters is what you can do, not what you look like doing it. That's why you fit. By the time autumn arrived with its explosion of color and crisp air, Hannah had been at the ranch for a full year. The anniversary passed quietly, marked only by Caleb presenting her with a new riding horse, a sturdy mare with intelligent eyes and a gentle disposition. "She's yours," he said, as Hannah ran her hands over the horse's smooth coat, "for when you need to ride to the Morrison place or into town. You shouldn't have to ask permission or wait for me to be available." "She's beautiful," Hannah breathed. "What's her name?" "Whatever you want to call her, she's yours to name." Hannah thought for a moment, then smiled. "Liberty. I'll call her Liberty." Caleb's eyes crinkled with understanding and approval. "Perfect." That evening, they held a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just good food and the ranch hands joining them for supper. Sam had brought his fiddle, and after the meal, he played while the others sang or clapped along. Hannah sat beside Caleb, his hand warm in hers, and looked around at the faces illuminated by lamplight. These rough men had become family. This hard land had become home. This life she'd chosen in desperation had become something she'd choose again with joy. "Speech," Thomas called out, emboldened by the festive atmosphere. "Mrs. Mercer should say something, it being a year and all." Hannah stood, feeling all eyes turned toward her. A year ago, such attention would have made her shrink. Now she met their gazes steadily. "I came here a year ago not knowing what I was getting into. I'd spent my whole life being told I was ordinary, unremarkable, valuable only for my ability to work without complaint. I believed it, because when you hear something often enough, you start to accept it as truth." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But this place taught me something different. It taught me that work done well has its own dignity. That capability matters more than appearance. That partnership is built on respect, not romance. And that sometimes the life you're meant for is the one you choose with clear eyes rather than the one you're assigned by circumstance." She looked at Caleb, saw pride and love in his expression. "I'm grateful to everyone here. For your patience while I learned, for your respect once I proved myself, and for treating me like a person rather than an ornament or a servant. You've made this place feel like home, and I don't take that lightly." "To Mrs. Mercer," Coop raised his cup. "May she always know her worth, and never let anyone tell her otherwise." "To Mrs. Mercer," the others echoed, and Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple sincerity of it. Later that night, as she and Caleb prepared for bed, Hannah stood at the window looking out at the moonlit landscape. The mountains were dark shapes against the star-filled sky, the grassland a silver sea stretching to the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, coming to stand behind her. "Leaving Virginia, choosing this life?" Hannah leaned back against his chest, felt his arms come around her. "Not for a single moment. Everything I left behind was killing me slowly. The disappointment, the invisibility, the certainty that I'd never matter beyond my usefulness. Here, I'm alive. Truly alive. Maybe for the first time ever. I'm glad I found you," Caleb murmured against her hair. "Glad you were brave enough to choose this. I'm glad you saw me when no one else did. Glad you valued what I could offer instead of what I couldn't." They stood together in the quiet darkness, two people who'd found each other through honest need rather than romantic idealism, who'd built something real through shared work and mutual respect, who'd learned that the best partnerships were the ones based on seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. Years later, when Hannah Mercer looked back on her life, she would remember two distinct versions of herself. There was Hannah Whitmore, the overlooked daughter who'd spent 22 years making herself small and useful, who'd believed she was worth less than her beautiful sister, who'd accepted crumbs because she'd never been offered a full meal. And there was Hannah Mercer, the rancher's wife, who'd learned her own worth through honest work and genuine partnership, who'd built a life of dignity and purpose in a hard land, who'd discovered that being chosen for the right reasons by the right person changed everything. The ranch thrived under their joint management. The house became known throughout the territory as a place of generous hospitality and excellent meals. The hands spoke of Mrs. Mercer with respect that bordered on reverence. And neighboring ranches sent their daughters to learn from Hannah, how to manage vast households, how to work alongside men as equals, how to survive and thrive in country that demanded everything and gave back only to those strong enough to take it. Lydia visited twice, bringing her new husband, a gentle banker from Richmond who valued her kindness and social grace, who never asked her to birth calves or mend fences, who gave her the life she was suited for. The sisters reconciled fully during those visits, each understanding that their divergent paths had been necessary, that comparison had been the poison and acceptance was the cure. "You look happy," Lydia said during her second visit, watching Hannah work in her expanded garden. "I am," Hannah replied simply. "Are you?" "Blissfully. Robert values me for exactly who I am, and I do the same for him. We're building something good together, just like you and Caleb." Lydia smiled. "We both found our places, didn't we? Just not the ones Father planned for us." "The ones we planned for ourselves," Hannah corrected. "That's what makes them worth having." When Hannah was 30, Caleb expanded the ranch, purchasing adjacent land and increasing their holdings to 5,000 acres. When she was 35, they brought on a partner, young Thomas, who'd grown into a capable rancher under Caleb's mentorship. When she was 40, the territorial governor visited their ranch, impressed by its reputation for innovation and fair treatment of workers. Through it all, Hannah remained exactly who she'd become, capable, respected, valued not for her appearance or her ability to please, but for her competence and her unwavering honesty. She raised no children of her own, but she mentored dozens of young women, teaching them that their worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, but by their own choices and actions. And every year on the anniversary of her arrival, she rode Liberty up to the high pasture and looked out over the land she'd helped build, the life she'd helped create, and remembered the girl who'd stood in a rotting Virginia parlor and been chosen for all the right reasons. She'd been told her whole life that she was second best, the consolation prize, the one men settled for when they couldn't have better. But Caleb Mercer had looked at her calloused hands and steady eyes and seen exactly what he needed. He hadn't settled. He'd chosen. And Hannah, in choosing him back and choosing this hard life and this vast country and this partnership built on work and honesty, had finally chosen herself. That choice had changed everything. Not because a man had rescued her, or because she'd transformed into someone different, but because she'd finally had the courage to value herself the way she deserved to be valued, to take up space without apology, to demand respect instead of begging for scraps. She'd gone from overlooked to unshakable, from invisible to essential, from second choice to irreplaceable. And standing on that windswept ridge with Montana spreading out before her like a promise kept, Hannah Mercer knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be, living exactly the life she'd earned through courage and capability and the radical act of choosing herself. The rancher's choice had been the beginning, but Hannah's choice, to believe in her own worth, to demand better, to build a life of dignity and purpose, that was what mattered in the end. She hadn't needed rescue. She'd needed someone to see her clearly and value what they saw. The rest, she'd done herself.